In recent years, fighting games have become the #1 genre of games for me. They offer up the purest, most engaging gameplay that you will find in my opinion. There's nothing quite like the thrill of learning a new combination of moves or coming out victorious among a friend, and at the same time watching yourself improve and learn from each fight you participate in. But the major problem with fighters is that they can easily scare off people with how complex some of them can be. But what if I told you there was a fighter that released this year that is easy to learn all of the fundamentals than others out there, yet still maintain an intricate combat system that you can dive into with a depth that is surprising if you choose to explore what it has to offer? I'm Pat Carey from the Republic of Players, and let's talk about Granblue Fantasy Versus. Many fighting games are beginning to see the importance of a compelling story being incorporated into their game, and Granblue Fantasy Versus rides a line between being captivating and bog standard. The story is simple in many regards, when chaos intrudes upon the skydom causing havoc and threatening the end of the world, so your everyday sort of issue you find in most video games. This chaos affects the main character Gran's friends and allies by causing them to have memory loss, and the best possible course of action to help them regain their memories is to beat the utter bejesus out of them till they remember who you are. You know, the sane way to jog someone's memory. But in all seriousness, it's a sufficient way of having all these characters come together to clash in a believable way. One of the more unique aspects to this story is the parts added on by the DLC characters, which are either not connected to the main plot, or they play around with the concept of chaos, which can manipulate reality in order to give alternative takes on sections of the story. This is a really creative way of introducing new characters and allows them to be imaginative with any new characters which will be coming in the game's second season pass. Though the biggest positive that can be taken away from its story has to be the characters they introduce. They have an immense sense of personality, making them endearing and more fully realised than most fighting games, even if some of the fighters don't have a deep or an engaging part within the story. Most of them pull you in with their charm, whether it be from their pure insanity or quirky little eccentric behaviours. The narrative becomes so much more engaging due to how appealing the cast is. It made my capacity for liking the story all the stronger because of its alluring characters. The story is long enough in and of itself, you get a good handful of hours out of it, and it never outstays its welcome. More missions to expand the game's tale is going to be coming out at a later date. Granblue Fantasy Versus is looking to be getting a steady stream of content, and these new quests will be free when they come out. And if it's anywhere near as entertaining as what the base game offered, it should be an enjoyable ride. Now, to get down and dirty and talk about the gameplay mechanics. After all, that is what makes or breaks a fighting game. Versus offers a simplistic basis for anybody taking a leap into the world of fighting games. All the commands you can do to unleash attacks are easy to get a grip of through its tutorials in the RPG mode or from its training mode. You have your basic moves with light, medium and heavy strikes, along with a unique attack that correlates to the face buttons. You have your throw, an overhead attack, and an interesting dodge function and a designated block button, which is something that you don't often see in 2D fighters. The more primary moves serve to help create an easy adjustment into Versus. Its light, medium and heavy strikes have auto combos attached to them. This is great for starting out to build confidence with the game and ease you into learning the game's mechanics. Every character having an overhead attack from the ground makes it a little easier to punish those who would crouch block, as I know from personal experience that jumping for an overhead attack can backfire quite easily, and having an attack that can be pulled off from the ground creates a stronger reliance on reading character movements, while also adding a bit of quickness to certain encounters. The dodge function is a fascinating one with two versions of it. A back evade dodges an attack coming your way, however the forward dodge can slip past attacks and close the distance between you and your opponent, or you can use it to cross over them and get in behind them. It's a mechanic that can be used to great effect to give you an advantage in certain situations. The guard button is certainly one of my favourite aspects. No longer having to hold the back button is a little lifesaver for me, as the odd time I would simply forget when crouched to do so and pay a heavy price. One of my favourite attributes to the mechanics is the skill attacks. They are what make Granblue Fantasy Versus a seriously compelling fighter. These are distinctive moves that hold certain qualities, from attacks like projectiles, anti-air and advancement. These will be your go-to moves to link up combos and dish out a hefty bit of damage. But what really makes these skills so enrapturing is that each of them has a cooldown period when used. This makes some fights become like a game of chess in my opinion, as you have to balance when you use them. Simply using them all up and waiting for them to cool down will provide an advantage for your foe to lay some pressure on you. But there is an extra layer to them that furthers the strategy behind fights, that being that there are various strength levels for each skill, and using stronger versions of it does a great deal more damage, but in turn takes it longer for the skill to cool down. It gives each fight a tactical feel, and the fact that these skills are easy to perform grants accessibility to anybody new to fighting games. The most complex moves to pull off will be your skybound arts, your super moves in this game. The inputs for them are a bit more demanding compared to everything else, though with a little practice you should be able to activate them with no trouble whatsoever. To activate your skybound art you first have to build up your meter. Once full you can deliver a devastating assault. And while a devastating assault is a good thing, it can be taken a step further with a super skybound art, which will unleash catastrophic damage on the opposing fighter. But to do a super skybound art, you need your meter full as well as your health being below a certain percentage to be able to use it. There's a wonderful complexity through the simplistic inputs for all these moves. However, going back to the skills you can use, they get more elaborate when it comes to the cooldown system. There are more difficult inputs to perform them, that makes the cooldown shorter. This creates a fantastic incentive to want to improve at the game, if the more straightforward and accessible inputs clicked with you. While it does give you an edge to pursue these quicker cooldown times, it's nothing too major as to leave someone who uses the easier method in the dust. There's a nice equilibrium between the two ways that keep things fair. All these mechanics come together to make a riveting experience. Combined with its slower pace at times, creates a more thoughtful fighter that is exhilarating and a joy to play. It's great to see a fighter that is simple to learn, and nothing else really feels as easy as Versus to pick up and play. It uses all the buttons at its command to deliver something that someone can get decent to good at relatively quick once they know which button does what. It's something that I've seen a lot of other fighters starting to do, but Versus definitely nails it in my opinion. Yet truly mastering it is where the fun will come from, and this is where the more complex nature of the game will shine. It has created a perfect balance, delivering simplicity without losing complexity. Now, the RPG mode is a highlight in and of itself. It works like a 2D beat 'em up, and I bloody love it for going this route. You have all the moves available at your fingertips as you take on guards, monsters and bosses. It's thoroughly enjoyable and is enough of a reason to get the game by itself. It has a neat little system for powering up the weapons you acquire, from leveling them up and finding multiples of the same weapon to fuse them and allow them to reach an even higher level. It's a fun little undertaking to try and make your character wholly overpowered. But the best feature of the RPG mode has to be the raid battles, where you fight massive foes. They bring a sense of epicness to the fight and put up a worthwhile challenge. This mode is honestly a thrill to blaze through, and if you have someone to play it with, you can go through it in local co-op or through online. The sad thing is that it seems impossible to find people online to play this game mode with. The RPG mode is a lot of fun. It gives me a retro vibe, and the slight mix up between it and the actual fighting game is a nice change of pace between the two, and going through it really helps with learning the basics of the game. Also, the fact that the story is told through this format was an interesting choice. It makes it stand out more, making it extra memorable than many fighting game stories out there, even if the story of Versus is a little lackluster. There are numerous other modes, from an arcade mode, practice mode, local multiplayer, and online play. Online is a fabulous experience from the little time I dabbled in it. This hands down has to be one of the nicest communities for a fighting game I have ever played. Everyone is so supportive and will even give you tips and engage with each other regularly. Casual matches are where it's really at though. Not only are the lobbies one of the best designed I've ever seen, where you have to go up to an arcade machine to get ready for a fight is honestly one of the coolest and cutest things I've ever seen. But it is where that sense of community this game created is best displayed. But with any fighting game I have ever played, local multiplayer is where they shine brightest. The competitive nature that it creates is on a whole other level and is what makes fighting games for me some of the greatest experiences out there for video games. There's nothing like the rush as you challenge friends or simply being able to see your opponent's face as you duke it out. The added intimacy increases the impact the game will leave on you. Visually, this game is just stunning. The anime aesthetic is nailed excellently. Arc System Works have shown to be the masters of this style, and no one else seems to match them in this regard. The animations in this game provided are splendid, and I couldn't help my eyes soaking in every little detail they could detect. The way characters move really exemplifies their personality. Also, the animations for the Skybound and Super Skybound arts are just mouth-wateringly pretty, and demonstrate just how visually appealing Versus is. They are utterly incredible. And at points it can really put its 2D animation inspiration to shame. Now, I consider myself a somewhat big fan of fighting games, though one thing I have never really got a grasp of is some of the more technical terms that are used in fighting game competitions. Yet, Granblue Fantasy Versus offers up clarity on these terms, which is a feature that I greatly appreciated. It's a nice little idea for those who want to learn a little more about fighting games in general, and it surprised me that this isn't a feature in other fighting games. The music is rather strange overall, but not in a bad way. A decent amount is a great mix between orchestra and rock that really captures the mood of the game and gets you pumped to beat the schnot out of someone. However, a good portion of the tunes are seemingly random and sounded really out of place to begin with. But once you gotta listen, you realise not only are some downright brilliant, they even outclass the mold of the fusion of orchestra and rock, which surprised me. Some of these tracks sounded like they could come from a retro game or even a goddamn nightclub. And I'm just sitting there going, yup, this is lit. The sheer variety it offers up for a soundtrack of a fighting game baffled me, as it was something completely unexpected, yet fits so perfectly. DLC is a touchy subject. It's a practice that a lot of people are not favourable towards, and in recent times, fighting games have been relying on season and character passes to deliver new characters and bump up the roster. Now, I have no problem with this, I enjoy supporting these fighting games, but I can see how it annoys a lot of people. Granblue Fantasy Versus has a rather small base roster, just tipping over 10 characters. It's no real issue due to how well the fighting mechanics were developed, though it definitely feels like a fuller game with the first season pass unlocked, and the season pass characters are just as compelling and are some of the most fun to play with. I feel that this game should have waited till all the characters for the first character pass were ready for launch, just to have that base game feeling beefier and not so bare bones. One positive for these character passes is that it keeps the game relevant for much longer, and that makes it more attractive to new people who may be interested in picking it up. I have no real major issue with the game. It was designed excellently and I don't see any major faults that would hamper the experience. I look forward to seeing how they develop upon the story in the RPG mode, as well as the new characters that will be coming out in the second season pass. Granblue Fantasy Versus is one of the best fighting games to come out in recent times. It creates one of the most simplistic and accessible fighting games for any newcomers out there, yet holds a brilliant layer of depth with its complex nature that creates a heart-pumping while strategic fighting game. Its story may be a little undercooked, but its lovable cast, wonderful RPG mode, its downright amazing mechanics and visuals make this a must-own fighting game in my opinion. And let's not forget the weird but wonderful mesh of different tunes. And that's Granblue Fantasy Versus. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. You know, all that goobly-goop where I beg for validation for the work I've done. Be sure to follow us on social media pages, which will be all in the description below, and be sure to head over to our Twitch where we will be bringing you some of the best esports action in Ireland. And until next time, have a good one.